This is KSL Sunday Edition with Boyd Matheson.
Welcome to Sunday Edition. I am Boyd Matheson. Each Sunday, we attempt to divide the rage from the reason, elevate the conversation, connect the dots, and make the news make sense. We have conversations with great thinkers, great leaders, and great people making a difference. We talk politics so we can discuss society, and we explore society so we can discuss principles and the people in America who actually live them. We bring the best and brightest to Utah, and we send the Utah model to our nation's capital and beyond. Well, the higher ground of common ground has become awfully hard to find in today's polarized politics. Loud and often angry voices on the political left and the political right dominate the headlines and drive the narrative that the nation is hopelessly fractured and haplessly doomed to decline. Sadly, more and more on both the right and the left have come to blame the Constitution for the resulting discord and governing dysfunction in our nation's capital. Our guest this morning, Yuval Levin, believes that the Constitution is not the problem we face, it's the solution. Yuval's a director of social, cultural, and constitutional studies at the American Enterprise Institute. He is a trusted voice, a brilliant thinker, and an extraordinary writer. He was someone I regularly looked to when I worked in the United States Senate. He's someone I turn to for wisdom, for perspective, and forward-moving solutions for today. Yuval recently released his latest work, American Covenant, How the Constitution Unified Our Nation and Could Again. It is most timely and is based on timeless principles, as always, with Yuval Levin, laying out how the Constitution can create unity by forcing us to act together. Right, imagine that, together, for our shared future. Well, Yuval joins us today from our nation's capital. And Yuval, welcome back to Sunday Edition.
Thank you so much, Boyd. It's great to be with you.
Each time I read one of your books, I think, okay, this is it. This is capstone project. Yuval's going to tap out and move on. But this latest work is truly stunning. It should be must-reading for everyone in our nation's capital and every citizen across the country. And I actually want to start with the very title, American Covenant. Why covenant?
You know, covenant is a way of reminding us that we belong together. In one respect, it's just another way of saying contract, and in another sense, it's very, very different from a contract. Contract describes just some things we owe each other in return for which we're going to hang together. A covenant describes a relationship that is ultimately not breakable, that makes demands on us by defining who we are, by shaping our identity as belonging together. And that's how I think about the American Constitution, and that's how I think about the American nation. We belong together. We are one people. And if we begin from that premise, then we can think about how to make this work rather than about whether to deal with each other. And I think that beginning is hugely important for helping American public life work in this moment.
Yeah, I love how in the book you talk about that very fact that unity is acting together, not thinking alike. How do we start to apply that in our communities?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in a sense, we talk a lot about unity in American politics now. We feel divided, we feel isolated and alienated. And so there is talk of unity, but very often we talk about it as if unity means everybody agreeing. And our politicians essentially say, if everybody agreed with me, then everything would be great. And I think that's true. If everybody agreed with me, everything would be great. But that's not going to happen. And it isn't really what we want either. The strength of a free society emerges from the fact of disagreement, the fact that different people bring different kinds of insight to the table. And ultimately, politics is an arena for acting together to address common problems. Politics is where we answer the question, what shall we do? And both the we and the do really matters. And ultimately, if we see it as an arena for action, then we can see our way to unity, even in a very diverse and often divided society. Because unity doesn't mean we have to agree. It doesn't mean thinking alike. It means acting together. We have to agree on a course of action that's acceptable to as many of us as possible. And that is achievable because we have a system of government that is built to enable us to act together when we don't think alike, by compelling negotiation, competition, the ways in which we deal with each other. That's what the Constitution is ultimately for. And if we see it that way, then we can see our way toward improving it and strengthening it.
Yeah. I love the fact that you lean heavily on Madison, but you also reference Hamilton, who got a play and a big Broadway
Right.
production. Jefferson, of course, got a big monument. Madison doesn't quite have as much, but he was really the one promoting unity, where Jefferson was much more about equity and Hamilton was a little more in terms of vitality and order. Kind of walk us through why the Madisonian approach is so important in that unity making.
It's really true. You know, I guess a musical about James Madison might be a little dull because he spent all of his time at a desk thinking and writing. But Madison stands out to me in part because he thought about this question of unity more than anybody else. He thought the problem to be solved was the problem of faction and the problem of intense and broad diversity. And in that sense, he was really ahead of his time. Madison sometimes strikes us now as a kind of 21st century thinker. He understood, even in 18th century America, that the big problem for a republic was going to be its internal diversity. And before you can argue about the policy direction and before you can argue about ideology, you have to have a framework for living together as a people. And once you achieve that kind of social peace, then you can have the debate between Jefferson and Hamilton. Madison had a side in that debate. He was a Jeffersonian, but he first of all believed in the necessity of the preconditions for a free society living together. And Madison is really the voice that speaks most in this book. This is not a lawyerly book about the Constitution. It's another way that Madison stands out. Among the prominent framers, he's almost the only one who was not a lawyer. And I think it served him well because he thought as a citizen and as a politician, which is what he was for his entire life, and ultimately thought about the health of American political life in a very distinct way. There are very, very few people in our political tradition, maybe only Madison and Lincoln, who made the question of union their question. And Lincoln had an obvious reason for doing that. Madison just saw ahead of his time what the big challenges were going to be. And for that reason, really, the Constitution, you know, it often is criticized for being a relic, for being behind the times, not sophisticated enough. But over and over, it proves itself to be more sophisticated than its critics about the deepest problems of modern democracy. And Madison is a big reason for that.
Fantastic. Well, when Sunday continues here on KSL5 TV, we're going to stay with the question with Yuval Levin, American Covenant, how the Constitution unified our nation and could again. Important, crucial conversation. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. We're staying with the question and the conversation with Yuval Levin from the American Enterprise Institute and author of the new book, American Covenant, How the Constitution Unified Our Nation and Could Again. Yuval, one of the things that I love that you frame in this book is we often talk about the Constitution being this charter for liberty, and yet really it's a charter for unity. Explain that for us.
Yeah, certainly there are a lot of important ways, of course, in which the Constitution protects our core liberties by restraining the reach of government into various arenas of our lives and making possible a free society. But it's very important to see that one of the core problems that the framers of the Constitution were trying to address was the problem of disunity, the risk of civil war and of social breakdown. It was very much on their minds at the end of the 18th century in America. And the Constitution arises to address that problem by providing various ways for differing and competing factions in American life to deal with each other, often to really literally make deals with each other. The American Constitution differs from a lot of other democracies around the world, the parliamentary democracies in Europe and Asia and much of the world, in that it doesn't empower narrow majorities to exercise power. It requires them first to grow, to broaden. When you win an election in the United Kingdom, you just win all the power of the government for however long you have your majority in parliament. You win an election in the United States, you win a seat at the table. And what happens at the table is bargaining and negotiation and accommodation among a variety of people who all won their seats at the table. And the American system is frustrating for that reason. It's especially frustrating for narrow majorities, but it is also very good at sustaining over the long term the capacity of our society to deal with difference. American democracy is now the oldest of the living democracies. It's been the most stable of the democratic regimes. And a lot of the reason for that is that it's built to contain dangerous differences and divisions and to allow us to find ways to deal with each other and to make change gradually and incrementally. That's oftentimes what it's criticized for, especially by progressives who want to see fast movement in their direction whenever they win a little tiny majority in Congress. But that's not how our system has ever worked, and it's not how we should want our system to work. Ultimately, it has to facilitate broad coalition building. That's really the knack that we've been losing in American life in the 21st century. And to recapture it, we could do worse than by first re-encountering and reacquainting ourselves with the American Constitution.
Yeah, and it really does lead to that kind of real deliberative process when it comes to lawmaking. As you mentioned, so many win a slim majority and think it's a mandate and think they should rush things through. That slow process of building coalition and overcoming obstacles is not a flaw, it's a feature in our constitutional republic. And help us walk through, how do we start to re-enthrone that great deliberative body that Congress, the United States Senate in particular, once was and needs to be again?
I think it's vital to see that Congress is at the center of our system. It is the first branch of government. It is where the core work of American republicanism and democracy have to happen, so that when Congress is in bad shape, our whole system is in bad shape. And today, Congress is in bad shape. Its members willingly and willfully give over their power and authority to the presidency and the courts. They don't want to take responsibility for hard decisions. And I think ultimately to change that and to strengthen Congress, we have to reinvest the ambition of members in the work of the institution by centralizing power in Congress in the hands of leaders, so that we operate as if there are only 4 members of Congress, the party leaders in the 2 houses. We've made it so that most members are right to think that spending all their time and energy and ambition on committee work and on substantive legislative negotiation would be a waste of their time. That's not actually where decisions are made. To change that, you have to change the underlying fact. You have to re-empower the committees, allow decisions to be made by groups of members who negotiate with each other. There are some mechanisms that compel this to happen. I think, for example, that the filibuster in the Senate, though it's not in the Constitution, it's a discretionary Senate rule, serves a very, very important constitutional purpose. It forces the parties to deal with each other and doesn't allow narrow majorities to avoid the work of negotiation. Reinvesting Congress in that work is really key. And so the book does talk about some congressional reforms to decentralize power, to re-empower committees, to rethink the budget process, things that seem very mundane, but that ultimately answer to the Madisonian insight that the institutional structure shapes political culture. So you have to think about incentives. This was really Madison's great insight, and it remains as true as ever.
Yeah, that is so important, that the ambition in the institution, rather the ambition in the individual, has to really drive that. Just in our last 30 seconds here, Yuval, you also mentioned in the book the note that George Washington sent as they sent the Constitution forward, talking about amity, talking about concession and deference. Just give us a 30-second summation of why that is such a crucial part of the covenant of the Constitution.
Yeah, Washington acknowledges that the Constitution itself is a product of compromise. And I think it's worth our seeing that for us, that means that it's especially well adapted to a politics of bargaining and accommodation, so that the very character of the institution and how it was made can help us understand what its purpose is, which is ultimately to help us deal with exactly the kind of division that we now face in American life.
Yeah, such an important part of that equation. The book, American Covenant, is such an important one. Everyone should pick that up and take it, not just a good read, but then start a conversation around your kitchen table, across your back fence, and in your community. Yuval Levin, as always, thank you for great writing, great thinking, and for being part of the crucial conversation in our country. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Boyd.
All right, great perspective there, and it is an American covenant. It's not a contract, and the Constitution is a piece of the puzzle that can get us back not just to liberty and freedom, but to unity, and that is the core of the institution. All right, stay with us. Much more coming up on Sunday Edition. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. You know, over the past decade, populism, unhinged from principle, has become, well, popular. Populism will remain a powerful, misused, and even abused political tool as long as current leaders and policymakers across the political spectrum are primarily concerned with preserving their own power within the status quo of the current system. The cry to take on the wealthy and well-connected echo from the liberal left, while chants against the establishment elite rings from the right. The real question is whether anyone is actually looking out for the little guy. So is an authentic populism possible? You see, inciting anger, fear, and frustration is pretty simple. Providing principled insight is much more difficult. Never has it been easier through social media to incite a populist uprising on almost any and every issue. In fact, a 4-year-old can do it, literally. Several years ago, I received a text message from my daughter Rachel and her husband Jeff, who are wonderful parents. They were on a very long drive from California to their home in Arizona. Buckled in the back seat, their 2 boys, Kaladin, age 4, and Matheson, age 2, were doing a good job enduring the seemingly endless drive. Now, Rachel told me that sometimes during their extended car rides, she and Jeff instigate a no water period for the boys because, of course, no one wants to have to stop at the side of the road for an urgent potty break. I think every parent attempts this at some point with their children on long car drives. Now, apparently there was no such water consumption restriction for the parents sitting in the front seat. And that is when the populist uprising begins in the back seat. Now, Kaladin, as the older, was trying to rile up the back seat to complain against this incredible injustice. In this case, he played both the leader and the crowd, as Matheson, the 2-year-old, didn't quite follow how populist rally chants are supposed to be done. So Kaladin began his chant and his echo. Everyone in the car is thirsty. Who in the car is thirsty? Everyone. Who wants water? Everyone. Is everyone in the front thirsty? Yes. Is everyone in the back thirsty? Yes. Is the front allowed to drink water? Yes. Is the back allowed to drink water? No. And the backseat populist movement against the tyranny of the parents in the front seat takes rise. Now, Kaladin could very easily lay claim to the leadership of the backseat populism while protesting the oppression of those oppressive people in the front seat. I could actually envision the 2 boys reenacting a seat from Les Mis with a French Revolution sign to boot. I'm sure Kaladin hadn't really thought that they were all going to have to stay in that same car together, or that if his uprising actually overtook the front of the car and he took control, that it would be devastating. A crash would result that would make drinking water and potty breaks pretty irrelevant altogether. So the problem with political populism is the same, because at its core, it's divisive. It creates this us versus them battle that usually results in shouts of what people are against instead of conversations and a vision about what they're for. It also focuses on demonizing the them instead of seeking to solve the problem with we. The Tea Party populism of 2009 used the angst around the Affordable Care Act as the piston to drive a white-hot engine of change against the them of then-President Barack Obama and congressional Democrats. The Occupy Wall Street movement similarly channeled frustration about the top 1% of earners, millionaires, and corporate executives as the populist target for people angry about the economy to rail against. Now, I am an equal opportunity offender when it comes to the siren song of populism and the politics of grievance, division, and contempt. Clearly, President Donald Trump rode a populist wave into the Oval Office in 2016. The Democrats have used populist promises of free things while blaming those who might pay for such free things in an attempt to claim the populist mantle. Both sides have contributed to the kind of populism that really isn't actually about the little guy or the little girl or the common woman or the common man. It's simply a way for those with ambition to gain and maintain power. The populist message is not hard for any candidate to claim. Now, I believe that the American people do want to be led. They actually want to be led by an authentic leader who has their back and is fighting for them. Populist grievance politics has far too many Americans becoming increasingly convinced that the system is rigged. They've watched their political leaders, along with lobbyists, wealthy donors, and well-connected elites in Washington, climb the ladder of success and then pull it up behind them. Citizens have felt the oppressive and heavy hand of government agencies that have targeted, taxed, and tested their trust in the institutions of our republic. Now, as we enter the fall election season, remember, populism only has to incite the riot. It doesn't have to govern, and it never has to truly lead. So the question is there a path that could transcend partisan politics and achieve an authentic populist agenda? I think the answer is yes, but it requires authentic leaders and engaged citizens. Authentic leaders recognize that their role is to help the little guy and every little girl and all the citizens all over the land. Abraham Lincoln was such an authentic leader and rightly declared that the purpose of government was to elevate the condition of men, to lift artificial weights from all shoulders, to clear the paths of laudable pursuit for all, to afford all an unfettered start and a fair chance in the race of life. Real leaders and policymakers ought to be focused on the more laudable pursuit of government that Lincoln described. In addition to government that fosters that fair chance, leaders must encourage a free market economy while also nurturing a robust civil society. Imagine the difference if, rather than pursuing an us versus them political populism of grievance, a truly authentic leader chose instead to focus on an empowering axis of institution and ideas, including properly focused government, a free market economy, and a powerful and empowered civil society. That would do wonders for all the real little guys across America. The push of a politically driven us versus them populism of grievance will sadly continue unless leaders and policymakers foster an environment where cronyist privilege ends, upward economic mobility begins, and real opportunity extends to all Americans. Until then, we will hear the cries of populism coming from candidates on the left and on the right. We all would be wise to remember that even a 4-year-old in a car seat in the back of a minivan can incite and launch a populist uprising. It'll require real leaders and all of us to work together and gain the insight that will lead to more heroic citizens, stronger neighborhoods, and the economic goodness that will clear the path of laudable pursuit for all. Well, that wraps it up for us on Sunday Edition today. I'm Boyd Matheson. Thanks for joining us. And as always, as you go out into the world today, make sure you see something that inspires, say something that uplifts, and do something that makes a difference. Music and the spoken word is next.